Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the scariest thing that has ever happened to you, paranormal or otherwise? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I was alone in my apartment, and I decided to take a shower. I locked the door out of habit. It can only be locked and unlocked from the inside. My clean and dirty clothes are thrown on the floor of the bathroom in two separate piles. When I finished taking the shower, my clothes, both dirty and clean, were neatly folded in two separate stacks on the floor. The door was still locked. I take very quick showers. This happened in the span of 5 minutes. I have no explanation, and I get goosebumps just thinking about it. This happened about a week ago, and nothing like it has happened prior or since. F. On my 12th birthday, I was on the way to the hike shop to get a new bike. I was with my dad, his girlfriend, and my brother. We were still about 10 minutes away from the town center, so nowhere near the bike shop. Some random, old, creepy-looking guy came up to us, looked down at me and said, "You buying a bike?" I looked at my dad, confused and kind of scared. We told him that we were on our way to buy a bike. He then started going on about how I must get a helmet and wear it all the time. We were a little freaked out, but we just assumed he was a weirdo and just forgot about it. A few hours later, I was riding through the park on my new bike and I fell off. I didn't fall very hard and landed on grass, so it was cool. As I went to get up and brush myself off, I looked up and he was just standing there, looking disappointed and shaking his head. He then shook his index finger at me and said, "I told you to wear a helmet." At this point, I just shit myself and rode as fast as I could home. What is even weirder, though, is the fact that I've moved about 40 to 50 miles away since then, and I still see him every once in a while. I don't believe in guardian angels, but it just creeps me out. This story scares the crap out of me every time I think about it. I was at my grandparents' house one night. My grandmother then came into my room at 3:30 in the morning and told me, "Your grandfather needs your help. Get up." This sort of startled me because she was never done anything like this. I go out to where my grandfather is, right outside the door that goes into the garage, and he tells me that the garage door just went up and down 6 or 7 times. We need to check it out. I obviously said all right, and we went to check it out, and only to find the pull string that prevents the door from opening, which can only be pulled from the inside, was pulled. He looks at me and says, "We have to go outside to fix it so no one can get in." We then head outside, and when we round the corner to look at the garage, the motion lights come on, and there seems to be scratches on the door. He and I fixed the door and went back to bed. About 2 weeks after this, I was staying there again and woke up at around 2:30 in the morning to hearing stomping in the kitchen, which is very close to my room. I get up and hear the stomps come closer to my door and stop. I figured that my grandfather was adjusting the thermostat. I opened my door to see what was going on, only to find that everyone in the house was asleep and all the lights were turned off. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. A few weeks passed, and I went over there on a weekend because I had nothing better to do. Since it was a weekend, I stayed up rather late and fell asleep watching TV on my bed with my door open. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and for whatever reason, I woke up without any reason. I look around and realize that I've fallen asleep with the TV on. I look at my door, and at that instant, I saw a man-sized figure step out of my doorway and walk down the hall towards the kitchen. I slammed my door and stayed up all night. By this time, I was pretty convinced I had a demon, or a ghost, or something in my grandparents' house. I was just relieved that whatever was in their house wasn't following me. Maybe a month after that last incident happened, I was at my dad's house, and I was about to go to sleep. At my dad's, I'm on the other side of the house from everyone, It was maybe 10:30 at night, and I was about to go to sleep. I'd laid down, turned my TV off, and was drifting to sleep. Then outside of my door, I heard a combination of stomping and a really low sound. This honestly scared the hell out of me. I, in all of my infinite wisdom, decided to see what it was. When I opened my door, I saw the same thing that I saw at my grandparents' house. I teared up from fear and left the light on and fitfully tried to sleep. It didn't work well. Maybe a month and a half had passed after the last incident. I was at a friend's house, and he and I cleaned out his shed so we could just hang out in there and smoke his hookah. He usually has a lot of people over to his house, but this night it was just he and I. We were smoking hookah and were almost finished. We were just listening to some music, and I was just sitting there listening to the music when all of a sudden a black flash darted underneath my legs, but I didn't feel anything. I started to look around to see if one of his cats came in with us. As I started to look around, I realized that there was no cat in the shed. I started to become afraid on the inside, but try to keep myself outwardly calm. I look up at my friend, who has the look of being close to panic, and all he says to me is, "I think something just ran underneath your legs." At that point, I started freaking out, because I didn't say anything about it. He told me that he saw it as well. We both ran out of the shed and went into his house and just watched TV until we calmed down and went to sleep. This was the last time anything like that had happened. This was maybe 3 weeks ago. I saw this question and figured that this could be a good read for someone. TLDR. I have a demon, and it's scary.
So what do you guys think? Do you think that this potential spirit, demon, or apparition was following the individual? Or maybe it was just something that he happened to have the unfortunate luck of living in 2 haunted houses? Or is there some logical explanation for it?
The house I grew up in was very strange. My friends did not like to spend the night and said that they had weird dreams there. At night it often sounded like someone was moving furniture around in the living room. My mom and I would randomly smell cigar smoke when no one in the house smoked. We would catch movement out of the side of our eyes, and nothing was there. Our dogs would suddenly leap up and follow something with their eyes, or would start wagging their tails for no apparent reason. I once had a dream about a man wearing a red plaid shirt with black hair and a mustache, leaning on the fence in the backyard. It was so striking that it just stuck with me for about a week before I mentioned it to my mom, and she had experienced a dream about the man in the past. We think that might explain the cigar smell. I was once home by myself and washing dishes when I heard the wood floor creaking behind me like someone was walking on it. I spun around. No one was there. I went back to washing dishes, and there was a few creaks closer. I turned around and asked whatever it was to stop. It did. The most unexplainable thing happened one night when I woke up to a scratching and rustling noise in my room. I thought that someone had broken into the house and was in my room, so I lay still for about 10 minutes as the noise continued. Then music from the music box on my shelf started playing. I flipped over in bed, and no one was there. My bedroom door was closed, and my dog was standing at the other side of the room, staring at the bookcase where my music box was. I got out of bed and saw that the drawer had been pulled out, hence the slow scraping noise, and that it had finally been pulled out enough to trigger the music. It was on a flat surface, so it couldn't have been slowly slipped, and it was too high for my dog to reach, even if he had the capability of being able to bother it. My mom said that the people my parents bought the house from were a widowed father with a young daughter. His wife had died from cancer in a home hospice in the house. She said that when I was a baby, she would hear me laughing and babbling when I was alone in the crib. and when she would look in the nursery, I would be looking up at something. For some reason, she felt like it was connected to the woman. A few years ago, I was in my bed on my laptop and covered up with just the sheets. The sheets were pulled away from me quickly to the end of the bed. I froze and held my breath for several seconds, trying to hear if anybody was under my bed. My first thought was a roommate was fucking with me. Nothing like that ever happened there again. My story doesn't involve anything paranormal, but it was equally as frightening when it happened to me. I was 10 years old, and it was the day before Mother's Day, and my dad had taken my older sister and me to the mall to get her a present. This was like a weeknight though, so the mall was pretty dead aside from a bunch of mall rats, as my dad called them. They were just either really old people that sit on the benches and stare at people, or gothic teenagers who have all the piercings and mohawks and stuff. Anyway, the shopping's done, and I have to go to the bathroom. My dad and sister wait on a bench, and I walk through these double doors that open up to a long corridor and lead to the bathrooms all the way at the end. I walk down and peek inside the bathroom. There are only 2 stalls, but for some reason, the main door is propped open. I go in anyway, because I really had to pee. So there I am, sitting on the toilet doing my business, when I hear voices coming down the corridor. They sounded like a group of the teenage gothic mall rats. I stand up, flush the toilet, and am about to open the door when I hear one of them come into the bathroom. I freeze because I thought it was weird for a guy coming into a girl's bathroom. There was a moment of complete silence, and then I saw a pair of heavy black boots approach my door. Then, without any hesitation, this guy just starts shaking the door really, really hard and violently, all while making some sort of weird animal-like noises. I sit back down on the toilet and almost start crying because I have no idea what's going on. The guy looks in the cracks in the door, and I can see that he has one of those huge septum rings, and it freaks me out even more. I hear the other guys that are standing in the corridor outside of the bathroom say, "Just grab her leg from underneath." And so this guy starts sticking his hands underneath trying to grab me. But I pull my legs up on the toilet and start hitting his hands with my little purse. Then he goes into the next stall and tries the same thing. The entire time he's like grunting and making weird sounds. I was so freaked out. I almost couldn't speak for some reason. I was like frozen, and my mouth couldn't form any words. Then I hear one of them say something about a cop car parked out front, so they all leave through a side exit. I sat on the toilet paralyzed with fear, and my squeezed eyes shut for a good 5 minutes, trying to convince myself that it didn't happen. But when I opened my eyes again, I could see the boot prints on the tiles of the floor, and it made me more scared. Finally, my sister comes in asking why I'm taking so long, and I burst out of the stall, crying my head off and looking down the corridor and back to my dad. One night I went to take my dog for a walk at around 10:30. As soon as we're out the door, he starts acting really agitated. I figured he just really needed to go. As we walk down the driveway, I hear a rustling from the tree in the neighbor's yard that's a few feet away and see a large, dark shape. We ran like hell to the street as a bear was now climbing down and was between us and the door. It wandered away without incident, and surprisingly, my dog still needed to poop. Well, when I was 10 years old, I lived in a house that gave you the creeps, even during the day. I will never forget some of the things I saw or heard in there. It was October 2003, and the day had been a calm, uneventful one. I had just fallen asleep, and the lights in the house were all out. I remember being shaken from my sleep by the sight of a shadowy figure hanging out on the stairs. Only half of its body was visible. It quickly ducked down, and I heard whispers. "He's still awake, we have to wait." These entities, spirits, demons, or whatever you want to call them, were planning on getting me that night. I quickly started screaming for my mother, who didn't believe me when she came to my room to comfort me. So there I was, all alone in my dark room, with two entities trying to get me. I tried to go back to sleep, but again I was quickly shaken by my feet and saw the two figures in my stairwell. I flipped over and covered myself in blankets, but I felt something breathing on me. The sound of the heavy breathing shook me to the core. I cried for my mother again. She came this time and only told me to not think about them, and they would go away. They never went away. The voices I heard talking to each other about how they were coming to get me, how they were going to wait till I fell asleep. This is when the music started playing. It sounded like an ice cream truck was coming through, or circus music, but who drives an ice cream truck and sits in front of someone's house at 4 a.m? I'll never forget that night, being woken up every time I even got close to drifting to sleep, the music, being paralyzed by the fear of getting out of my bed and what might be waiting for me. I later came to know these figures as the man with the hat and the tall dark figure. There was a third entity that stayed in the basement of the house that my brothers and I all saw at one time or another, crawling up the stairs to the kitchen slowly. A part of me wants to go back to that house and face my fears, but in reality, retelling this story brings me down to my knees in fear and uncertainty. When I was about 10, I went on a summer vacation to the Black Sea with my mom. I couldn't swim back then and never learned after what happened. It was on the first day there, and we went out for a swim. My mom got me those inflatable things you put on your arms. The plan was to enjoy the day, and I was excited to learn how to swim. The weather wasn't too great, but the water felt okay. It all changed very fast. We got pulled away from the shore by a rip current, and the sea was about to storm. The waves got higher, and no matter how hard we tried to get back on the sand, the sea only pulled us further and further away to the side. And on the side was a concrete wave breaker. My mom started getting physically tired, and I could see sparks of panic in her eyes. We held onto the concrete, and there was no way to get away from the water and on top of the pier. The waves were getting stronger. All the people from the beach disappeared. We shouted help, but even if someone was nearby, they wouldn't hear us. The waves were very loud, smashing against the concrete underneath the pier just a couple of feet away. Suddenly, a lady appears in the water next to us. We had no idea where she came from. She tells us that there's a ladder on the other side of the pier, and while we're doing our best to hold on to the metal on the side of the pier, she disappears. Again, we didn't see where she went. The waves are at their hardest, and the only way for us to survive is to swim underneath the pier where the waves are hitting the concrete. We have just one chance at it. We patiently wait for a few second window between the waves, swim under the pier to the other side and find a ladder. Up to this day, we don't know who that woman was, but she saved our lives. And that day I decided that I'm going to make sure my life is worth saving. One of my close friends lived next to a house that was always vacant. It would sell, people would move in, and then one day they'd be gone and the house would be up for sale again. One summer, when the house was listed again and the last family had moved out, we decided to take a tour and eat some Jack-in-the-Box we had picked up. We weren't very smart sometimes and thought it would be cool to play chicken with whatever was haunting the house. My friend was really skinny and crawled through the doggy door that led straight into the kitchen, then opened the back door for me. We went through all the rooms, and it was pretty nondescript, just a typical 50s style bungalow house with a similar layout to his home. Lots of pretty woodwork and built-ins. After we determined that the house really wasn't that creepy after all, we sat down in the dining area on the floor across from a little horseshoe-shaped nook with a kitchen table and built-in bench. It was dusk out, but the windows didn't have curtains, and it never got that dark in our city anyway. At this point, we had been in the house for maybe 25 minutes, and after we finished eating, we stayed sitting just to hang out and talk since we weren't spooked out at all. All of a sudden, mid-sentence, completely out of nowhere, my vision went black, and I felt this eerie coldness wash all over me. I'm getting chills thinking about it. A feeling so thick, I felt like it penetrated through my body down to my bones. At the very same moment this happened, my friend screamed. I virtually could not see anything and was groping around trying to find something to grab onto. And I felt so unsettled and cold. There's really no other word for it. After what felt like hours, I felt my friend's hands in mine, and he pulled me to my feet and dragged me through the house to the back door. He kept pulling on my arm, and I still couldn't see anything. We got outside, and slowly, you know that feeling when you get a whole body shiver and it runs down your spine? As soon as I was outside, that's what I felt. Except this was a whole body shiver that started at the tip of my toes and went all the way up to my scalp. And unexpectedly and suddenly, I could see again. My friend was as pale as a sheet and looked absolutely terrified. I felt off and sort of gross, I guess is the best word, and in shock. I told him that I couldn't see it all until I was outside, that it felt like I had been enveloped in blackness. He was just staring at me, and I finally asked him why he had screamed. He hugged me and told me that he pulled me out of the house as soon as I started reaching around like I was blind, because a little girl who was completely black and yet see-through crawled out from under the table we were across from and sat on top of me. I was at a cabin trip for a weekend with my uncle and his friends. I had just turned 13 and he wanted to take me on a man trip. So they were having beers and relaxing after a good snowboarding session, so I asked him if I could have a beer. He just threw a 6-pack at me and said, "Drink all you want." And I had like 5 beers and started feeling a little dizzy, as I now call it drunk. So I went outside the cabin for a piss, and it was dark as fuck, and we were in the middle of the woods with no lights. I was pissing and started walking in the wrong direction. It was dark AF, and it was snow everywhere, so I couldn't find the cabin. I started panicking and running around the woods for about 20 minutes. I was so afraid I started crying. After a while, I heard a car coming. I ran out to see if he could drive me back. It was a pickup truck with a weird-looking man in, and he asked me what happened. I told him I was at a red cabin not far from here. He told me to wait in his car while he called the cops. I entered his truck. He took out the keys and locked the car and left. The car was pretty old, so I couldn't open it without keys, and the inside locks were busted. I thought I was going to get killed and cut into little pieces. The car was filled with porn mags and beer. I'd never been so scared ever. I was in the car for maybe 15 minutes. Then he came back with my uncle and his friends, opened the car and let me go. I was so glad to still be alive. That weird guy was just laughing and told me to wait a couple of years with the alcohol and left. My uncle gave me €50 and told me to never say anything about this to my parents. So in April of 2011, I went to see the movie Insidious. That old lady that followed the main character really stuck in my memory. Skip forward a few months, pretty much forgotten about the film, my friend links me a picture showing how to have a lucid dream. I had been interested in the subject, so I thought I would try it out when I went to bed. Ended up having a bad allergic reaction, hay fever, at about 4 p.m., so I lay down on my bed with a wet towel on my face to recover. I decided I might as well try to lucid dream then, as I'm lying down anyway. Anyway, after lying on my bed completely motionless for about 20 to 30 minutes, I began to imagine my room, but at night, and with the woman from Insidious standing at the bottom of my bed. Shit me up. I tried really hard to stand up, but felt pinned to the bed. It took me a good 20 seconds to get up. That was my first experience with her. Skip forward a year, and I'm usually staying up really late doing work for school. I like to eat at night, so I usually go downstairs at about 1 a.m. to get in some cereal. Every single time I go downstairs, I get an extremely vivid picture of her appearing in my head, and I have to turn on as many lights as I can. It's really horrible, and being an 18-year-old dude, I feel like a complete pussy for getting scared over nothing. I lived in a student house last year, and we would go sit up the stairs at night and use ghost calling apps on our phones, and we would get all paranoid. But one time we left the room and decided to play a game of Crazy Wheel, and my two friends ended up having to slow dance to the song Everybody Hurts. They got halfway through the song, and then we paused the music to move on and close the laptop. We eventually went back under the stairs hours later. Within 5 minutes of chasing ghosts, we heard the voice loudly singing, "Everybody hurts," and then abruptly shut off. We run out of the room and checked the laptop to find that it was still closed, and when we opened it, the song was not even loaded to the spot where the words are said. We could not replicate it. Had someone try to break into my house while my parents were out at dinner. My brother and I were home alone. I was about 14 at the time, and he was 9. I was gaming in my room, and my bro came to tell me he'd heard something at the back door. So, to reassure him, I went to the back door and listened. Heard something skittering on the back deck. I assumed it was a cat. Then I heard heavy creaking, and the doorknob rattled. Nope. Ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, went back to the door, unlocked it, and opened it very slowly. The backyard was empty. Funny thing was, my teenage mind at the time said, well, everything's okay now. I locked the door and went back to gaming. When my parents got home a few hours later, and we told them the story, they were horrified that we hadn't called them or the police immediately. First of all, background. While I'm not superstitious, I do feel like there are leaks in some places from either the past or somewhere else. Kind of a weird opinion, I know, but that's me. I was raised in a Christian home, but did not see myself as such. However, I had a few unexplained events in my life and had written them all down. This is copied and passed from the document, so I apologize for the length ahead of time. My friend and I were in the middle of a city park around 9:30 or 10 p.m. Given this was not the best thing for two college girls to be doing, but we were both night owls and enjoyed night walks. We stayed in the light ways and eyesight of the car. She, being a pagan, wants to thank the mother of the beautiful weather. I, being raised Christian, but having no beliefs one way or another at the time, stood at a fair distance to give her room to do her thing while still being close enough to guard her. All of a sudden, the weather changes from a balmy 65 degrees with a little wind to a chilling and blustery, tear the skin off from your bones cold wind. I had this sick feeling in my stomach that we were not wanted and or shouldn't be there and needed to leave quick. My friend was terrified and was crying uncontrollably, saying something about how she did it wrong, and she's sorry. I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to my car and leave. So I half dragged, half carried her, telling her to keep her voice down and it'll be alright. She repeats over and over that she's sorry, and I'm about to slap her just so she'll snap out of it. That's when I saw them. About 60 yards away, there was a line of 4 people. At first I thought they were cops, and I was mentally readying myself to cite the First Amendment about freedom of expression, blah blah blah. I was trying to keep my friend from seeing them, but that didn't work. She immediately stopped crying and stood on her own. This, of course, was not ideal, and I was exasperated and slightly pissed at the whole ordeal. That feeling in my stomach was about to knock me to my knees, it was so intense. The 4 approached us slowly across the first lawn. There were lights and city sounds, and my car was mere feet away. These people got closer, and my friend started reciting something about protection, and I'm tired of the bullshit. To my friend, I said quietly, "Get your ass in the car now." My friend looks at me and nods thankfully. We reach my car, and the people are closing the distance between us and their original point rather quickly, more like a swift march. I auto-unlock my car, and both my friend and I get in. I promptly lock the doors and get my phone ready to call 911 if needed. In that short time span, I hadn't been watching the people, but my friend's screams brought me to my attention. They were in front of the car and in my headlights. They were dressed drabbily in t-shirts and ripped jeans, and I realized were all men. They had some writing or a tattoo on their face, and when they linked arms, revealed a uniform tattoo that when they put their arms out, I shit you not, said, "Nothing is worth your hope." I jammed the key in the ignition and put it in reverse, and nearly running into a police car in the process. Having been transfixed on the 4 men, I didn't hear the sirens. Turns out that these 4 men were part of a sect or cult group who actually knew my friend because of their coven meetings or church for pagans. She had said that she was going to park that evening for Thanksgiving, and they were going to honour her ceremoniously. My friend had no idea and had to go to extensive therapy after, and I went to a few of my own sessions myself. After a few weeks, I was as recovered as could be, but my poor friend somehow just lost it. I still see her when I can, but she sometimes doesn't want to see me, as I triggered that night back for her. I think the one thing that really bothered me and has stayed with me for years later was when the police questioned them about what they would have done with me. One of them said, "Throw it away."